What would you do if simply walking someone to a bus stop cost you your life? Not because of something you did, not because of a fight, not even because of a mistake, but because of the color of your skin. This is the story of Anthony Walker, an 18-year-old with a future so bright it should have been impossible to extinguish. A young man studying his A-levels, dreaming of becoming a lawyer, a son, a brother, a friend, a talented athlete with potential to represent his country. A young man who chose peace, even when hate was thrown directly in his face. And yet, on a quiet summer night in July 2005, in a place that many would call ordinary, safe, familiar, that choice cost him everything. Because this wasn't just a murder. This was an unprovoked, calculated, racist attack. An attack that began with words and ended with something far more brutal, something almost unimaginable. And here's the part that's hardest to accept. This didn't happen decades ago. This wasn't hidden in some distant past where we can say things were different back then. This happened in modern Britain, in the 21st century, in a country that prides itself on tolerance, diversity, and equality. So how does something like this still happen? How does casual racism, the kind people dismiss as just words, escalate into something so violent, so final? And more importantly, how many warning signs were ignored before it got to this point? Because Anthony Walker's death didn't come out of nowhere. It came from something deeper, something uncomfortable, something that still exists today. In this video, I'm going to take you through everything. What happened that night, step by step. The horrifying details that shocked the nation. The courtroom revelations that left even seasoned judges shaken. And the heartbreaking impact on the family left behind, forced to turn grief into a fight for change. But we're not stopping there. Because this isn't just Anthony's story. It's part of a much bigger picture. A pattern that stretches far beyond one city, one country, one moment in time. So stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not just a story. It's a reality that too many people still face. And before we go any further, if this story is already hitting you hard, if you believe no young life should be stolen simply because of the color of their skin, then prove it right now. Hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing these hidden UK racism stories to light together. Because silence only helps these stories fade. And Anthony Walker deserves to be remembered. Let's go back to the evening of July 29th, 2005. A warm summer night in Huyton, Merseyside. Nothing about it felt unusual. Nothing about it suggested that, within hours, a life would be taken in one of the most brutal racist murders the UK had seen in years. Anthony Walker was doing something simple, something ordinary. He had been babysitting his young nephew, spending time with his girlfriend, Louise Thompson. It was the kind of evening millions of people experience every day, quiet, uneventful, safe. At around 11 p.m., the night began to wind down. Anthony, Louise, and his cousin Marcus Ben stepped outside. Their plan? Walk Louise to the bus stop. That's it. No danger, no tension, just a short walk through familiar streets. But then, they arrived at the bus stop near the Huyton Park pub, and everything changed. Standing nearby was a 17-year-old named Michael Barton. Almost immediately, the atmosphere shifted. What started as a normal night turned hostile. Barton began shouting racist abuse. Not subtle, not ambiguous. Direct, aggressive, dehumanizing. Words designed to provoke, to humiliate, to spark a reaction. Now, think about that moment. You're 18 years old. You're with your girlfriend, your cousin, and someone is targeting you with hate in public. What do? Anthony Walker chose something most people struggle to do. He chose peace. He didn't engage. He didn't retaliate. He didn't escalate. Instead, he turned around and walked away. That decision should have ended the situation. It should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because Barton wasn't alone. And he wasn't finished. As Anthony, Louise, and Marcus walked toward another bus stop, trying to leave the abuse behind, they didn't realize they were being followed. Barton had joined up with his cousin, 20-year-old Paul Taylor. And together, they got into a car. Now ask yourself, why follow them? Why not just let it go? Because this wasn't random anger. This was something more deliberate, something more dangerous. The car tracked them, slowly, quietly, through the streets, until they reached McGoldrick Park. A dark, open space. Less people, less visibility. The perfect place for something to happen. And that's when the ambush began. Barton and Taylor got out of the car. The tension exploded. Suddenly, this wasn't about words anymore. This was physical, aggressive, unpredictable. Louise and Marcus realized what was happening almost instantly. Fear kicked in, and they ran. They had no choice. They ran for help, for safety, hoping Anthony was right behind them. But he wasn't. Anthony Walker was trapped, alone, facing two attackers. And what happened next was beyond anything anyone could have expected. Paul Taylor had brought something with him. Not a random object. Not something picked up in the heat of the moment. A weapon. A mountaineering ice axe. Let that sink in. An ice axe. The kind of tool designed for climbing mountains. Being used in a park, in a residential area, against an unarmed teenager. This wasn't spontaneous. This was prepared. And in that moment, Taylor swung it. With force. With intent. The adze end of the axe struck Anthony's head. The impact was devastating. So severe that it embedded deep into his skull. That's not a strike meant to scare. That's not a strike meant to injure. That's a strike meant to kill. Anthony collapsed, gravely injured, defenseless. And just like that, a normal night became a nightmare. Meanwhile, Louise and Marcus were running. Desperate, panicked, trying to find help, trying to get back in time. But when emergency services arrived, the damage had already been done. Anthony was rushed to Huyton Hospital. Doctors worked quickly, urgently, trying to stabilize him, trying to save him. But the injuries were catastrophic. He was transferred to the Walton Center, a specialist unit. But even there was little hope. Hours passed. Machines kept his body going. But his brain had suffered irreversible damage. And then, in the early hours of July 30th, Anthony Walker was pronounced dead, just hours after leaving the house, to walk someone to a bus stop. Gone, at 18 years old, because of an attack. That should never have happened. And as the reality of what had taken place began to spread, one thing became clear immediately. This wasn't just a murder. This was a racist hate crime. And it sent shockwaves across the entire country. From the moment Anthony Walker was attacked, Merseyside police recognized the nature of the crime. This wasn't ambiguous. This wasn't uncertain. It was clear. This was racially motivated. The evidence was overwhelming. Eyewitness accounts, the racist abuse of the bus stop, the deliberate pursuit of Anthony and his group, and a weapon, an ice axe brought to the scene. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment escalation. This was something far more chilling. As police began their investigation, the suspects had already fled. Michael Barton and Paul Taylor didn't stay. They didn't turn themselves in immediately. Instead, they ran, leaving the country, heading to Amsterdam. Now think about that decision. If this had been a misunderstanding, if this had been self-defense, why flee? Why leave the country? Public outrage grew quickly. The case gained national attention. Media coverage intensified. And then something unexpected happened. Joey Barton, a professional footballer and Michael Barton's brother, made a public appeal. He urged them to return, to face justice. The pressure mounted, and eventually they did return to the UK, where they were arrested, charged, and prepared for trial. The trial took place in December 2005 at Liverpool Crown Court. And what emerged inside that courtroom was deeply disturbing. Paul Taylor admitted to the killing. He didn't deny delivering the fatal blow. But the focus of the trial extended beyond just the act itself. It examined intent, motivation, and the events leading up to the attack. Michael Barton denied murder, but the prosecution presented a clear narrative. He had initiated the racist abuse. He had participated in the pursuit. And, crucially, he had supplied the weapon. The jury listened, carefully, patiently, and the judge, Lord Justice Levison, delivered words that would echo far beyond the courtroom. He described the attack as a terrifying ambush, a phrase that captures the calculated nature of what happened, because that's exactly what it was. Not random, not chaotic. An ambush. Planned, pursued, executed. But he went further. He called it a racist attack of a type poisonous to any civilized society. The verdicts followed. Paul Taylor was convicted of murder. Michael Barton was also found guilty. Both held responsible. Both accountable. The sentences reflected the severity of the crime. Taylor received a minimum term of over 2 decades. Barton received a lengthy sentence as well. But even as those sentences were handed down, a question lingered. Is justice ever enough? In a case like this, because no sentence, no matter how long, can bring Anthony back, and no verdict can undo what happened in that park. But the trial did something important. It exposed the truth, clearly, publicly, and it forced the country to confront something uncomfortable. Because this wasn't hidden, this wasn't isolated, this was a reflection of something that still existed within society. Behind every headline, there is a human story. Anthony Walker wasn't just a victim. He was a son, a young man full of promise. His mother, G. Walker, lost her child in the most violent, senseless way imaginable. Try to imagine that moment, receiving the news, knowing that your son, who left the house just hours earlier, was never coming back. But Anthony's life was filled with ambition. He had dreams, plans, a future he was actively building. He was deeply rooted in his faith, someone who believed in peace, in doing the right thing. And that makes what happened even more painful. Because when faced with hate, he chose not to respond with anger. He walked away. And yet, it still wasn't enough. His cousin and his girlfriend were left with memories that would never fade. The moment everything changed, the moment they ran, the moment they realized he wasn't with them, and his mother could have been consumed by grief. But instead, she turned her pain into purpose. She founded the Anthony Walker Foundation, an organization dedicated to tackling racism and promoting equality, turning unimaginable loss into something that could help others. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. So tell me honestly in the comments, have you or someone close to you ever faced racist abuse or violence like Anthony Walker did that night in Liverpool? Share your thoughts or experiences below because your voice helps expose these realities. Anthony Walker's murder didn't happen in isolation. It existed within a broader reality, one that the UK has struggled with for years. Because racism doesn't always start with violence. It starts with words, with attitudes, with things people dismiss. And when those go unchallenged, they can escalate. The comparison to other cases raised difficult questions. Had enough really changed? Or were these patterns still repeating? Because the Walker family had already experienced racism before this tragedy. This wasn't new. It was part of a wider experience. And that's what makes it so difficult to confront. Because it's not always visible, but it's there. And sometimes, it leads to devastating consequences. Now zoom out for a moment. Because this isn't just a UK story. Across the world, similar patterns exist. Unprovoked abuse, escalation, violence, different countries, different contexts, but the same underlying issue. What makes this story so powerful is how ordinary it began. A simple walk, a normal night. And that's what makes it frightening, because it shows how quickly things can change, how something small can turn into something irreversible. Anthony Walker should be alive today. He should have had the chance to live out his dreams. But instead, his story became a reminder of what happens when hatred is left unchecked. Because racism doesn't always start loudly. It builds, quietly, until one day, it doesn't stay quiet anymore. And that's why stories like this matter. Because they force us to confront reality, to question what we accept, and to decide what we're willing to challenge. So thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. And stay with us, because there are more stories that need to be told.